Hello everyone, it is Patricia from tarantulaheaven.com. I have Miss Spidey here in the same position that she's been in for a very long time. She's my G Rosea, and today I wanted to share some information that I recently learned from a podcast that Tom Moran had done. This is about dyskinetic syndrome, DKS, which is one of the most fatal diseases that we know to affect tarantulas. To my knowledge, it is always fatal. There's no cure. And so Tom Moran did an awesome interview with a doctor or a vet who specializes in tarantulas. And this doctor, I believe his name is Dr. Andy Anderson, had a really amazing take on DKS and shared some really interesting things that I didn't really know before, didn't think about before, and I thought it might be interesting for you since I think that all of us tarantula owners and lovers are terrified that our tarantulas will perhaps get this disease, especially since the causes of the disease are not too known. You know, we have a lot of hypotheses, but not necessarily any real proof. If you guys don't know who Tom Moran is, he is one of the probably biggest gems that we have in the tarantula hobby. He's a longtime tarantula owner and hobbyist, and his information and just like wealth of knowledge is amazing. And he is also a really great person. I believe that by profession he's a teacher, and so you can really see that in watching his videos, just how well he explains things and just how much information he's able to give. So I highly recommend Tom Moran's channel, his website, Tom's Big Spiders, and I will certainly link the podcast that I actually, it's a two-part podcast or interview with Dr. Anderson, and I will certainly link it below because it's definitely worth listening to the whole thing. I'm just giving you a little bit of bullet points. You have to listen to the whole thing. It's fascinating. There are a few things that I didn't necessarily think about in terms of possible causes of DKS. What we think causes DKS right now are, chemicals, scents, things that are, in your home. But Dr. Anderson made some really good points about things that maybe a lot of us have in our homes that we have not really been thinking about. So Dr. Anderson actually talked about treatments that we would give our dogs and cats, such as flea treatments. And I had not thought about that before because my cat was an indoor cat and she never came in contact with any other animals. And so I had never given her any tick or flea treatments. But I know that many of us do have dogs or cats that, you may have a few pets that are regularly getting flea treatments. And I didn't actually think about the possibility of these chemicals, or even just like not even necessarily the chemicals in the air, but the topical chemicals being a risk to tarantulas. I think most of us would consider that, okay, if we're getting the house like bombed for fleas, we should probably move our tarantulas out until that's over. But that's not to say that, the particles couldn't be lingering in the air. But also, like, there's topical treatments that we put on our pets all the time, and that could possibly be transferred to the tarantula. So for this reason, Dr. Anderson actually recommended that if you have to give your pets a flea treatment or any type of treatment, that you try to go the oral medication route. And I know that that's really, really hard because a lot of our pets don't really like taking their pills, but it is safer in terms of your other pets, especially like tarantulas, in terms of DKS, because if you are doing a topical treatment, we aren't always keeping track of the things that we touch. So even if we wash our hands, it's not to say that, like, if we pet our animal, some of it still couldn't get on us, then, we're touching a cockroach or we're messing around in the tank, and then all of a sudden we've introduced a chemical into the tarantula's space, even like holding your tarantula after petting your dog or cat that you put a topical treatment on. So you have to be very, very mindful. This could be the same thing with like tick treatments too. Dr. Anderson did actually state that if you are going to do a topical tick or flea treatment, that you should probably get the more expensive kind. And I thought that was an interesting insight. The reason why is because the cheaper over-the-counter one tend to not dry as fast. So there's more of, I guess, a possibility of like transfer or like stickiness to your hands or on anything else. So that's it on tick and flea treatments. I think that, You want to try to do an oral medication if you have one of these animals. And you also want to, if you do have to do a topical treatment, to get a prescription, more expensive one if you can afford it. I know sometimes we can't always, but I think that if you have to use an over-the-counter treatment topically, make sure that you are really, really monitoring all the things that you're touching. If there's any contact with that animal and then contact with your tarantula or your tarantula's things or your tarantula's food, just be very, very mindful. Dr. Anderson also talked about other causes of DKS, which aren't necessarily too surprising, like fumes, cleaners, candles, smoke. Like, these are things that I think most of us who've done any research on DKS have known that could be a possibility that you want to keep away from your tarantulas. But he also made a really wonderful point about, like, it could be anything with a scent, even essential oils, which I don't use essential oils because they tend to be too powerful of a smell and I don't really like the smells. But a lot of people use essential oils. A lot of people have them in their houses, in diffusers, and these things are like promoted as natural, and I guess they are, but for a tarantula, it could actually be a thing. And so rather be safe than sorry. The safety of these things, especially for animals, is quite controversial. Dr. Anderson actually says that for cats and dogs, there are many things that point to these things being unsafe. He has seen, he talks about in the podcast of seeing animals with like chemical burns on their ears because their owner was trying to treat some infection or whatever they had with an essential oil. And so be very, very mindful of like anything, even something that you think could be completely benign, anything that has a scent or is like an oil, a chemical, whatever. You have to be very, very careful. Dr. Anderson also said some really interesting things about why don't we know more about DKS, and the main reason was just that it's really hard to study because like every spider with DKS would have to be submitted, collected, tested, and that is kind of hard. So he was kind of pointing to that, that is one of the reasons why DKS is still kind of a mystery. Dr. Anderson did confirm when your tarantula has DKS, the most thing that you can do is really do just supportive care. It is fatal. The biggest thing is really just to keep them hydrated. And Dr. Anderson actually did say something very interesting, that usually he believes the tarantula dies not from the neurological issue of DKS, which is something that I originally thought, but it's more so about dehydration. Yes, the tarantula's nervous system is being impacted by DKS. You can see the jerky movements. It's kind of freaking out, doesn't have control over its body. But it is because of that the tarantula can no longer drink and gets dehydrated, and then that is the cause of death. So maybe it's both, but I thought the dehydration theory was actually quite interesting and wise. So I think that's also a possibility. So I say all that to say, one, check out Tom Moran's channel, his podcast with Dr. Anderson. I really love what Dr. Anderson had to say, and Tom is such a good interviewer. He knows how to steer the conversation, what questions to ask, how to add in his own information without being like taking the spotlight away from the guest. It's fantastic. And to also share some new information from somebody who actually treats or studies tarantulas and is familiar with them. And give you guys more, tips or things to think about in terms of keeping your tarantulas safe and healthy. So I hope you found that helpful. Let me know what you think about Tom's podcast, and I'll see you next week for a Tarantula Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.